Alrighty, here's one on sealants, threadlockers, retaining compounds. These are things that every mechanic should have these in their toolbox. I've kind of boiled it down to the simplest ones. You know, I don't need 15 different kinds, but I got a few here that'll do just about everything you'll encounter. I was talking about seal retention with somebody, having seals pushing out of a hub on an axle flange, and so that's where Loctite 620 comes in, and so it's a pretty much jack of all trades retaining compound. I mean, it's super glue for metal. The reason I use 620 is because back when I was working on Caterpillars a lot, Cat branded a retaining compound. They didn't give a number, and I got talking to engineering, and they said, well, it's just Loctite 620 in our bottle. So I started buying Loctite 620, and it works exactly the same. I think now they've moved on to 638, which is the same, but cures a little bit faster and doesn't necessarily need an activator on stainless steel. But I don't do much stainless steel, so I don't care about an activator. I just put this stuff on. It's an ionic bond, so you need to make sure the metal's really clean. Bright and clean with gasoline or brake clean or whatever, acetone, and put it in there, put it together. So 620, what I wanted to say is it's the highest temperature of the retaining compounds. They say it's good to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. You can put it on all engine components, just about. It'll hold up. It won't come loose. Some of the other ones, it also, 620 will bridge a big gap, 10,000ths of an inch, 1/4 millimeter, maybe a little bit more than that. So, I mean, you can have a loose, sloppy fit and glue it up and stick it together, and it'll hold. There's lots of videos on YouTube of people putting together basic stuff, slip fit shafts, and they'll drill a hole and turn a shaft and stick it together with one of the Loctite retaining compounds. And I mean, it takes a 6-foot cheater pipe to twist the thing off. Which is not necessarily a good thing all the time. Sometimes you want to be able to get stuff apart, but this stuff, if you just heat it up with a torch, it'll pop about 500 degrees. It'll completely let go. Usually before that, it'll weaken about 300 degrees. I think it's at half strength or something. So it's good stuff. I mean, it'll seal, it'll bond. It's mostly for round, circular parts, shafts, seals, bearings, just general purpose round, mostly round stuff. You can use it with a press fit. I like it with press fits too, because, no matter, even if you've got essentially a ground surface on a ground surface, you still have really small little ridges in the metal. And when you press and smear it all together, there's still little voids in there. Well, if you put Loctite retaining compound on there, it fills all those voids in. It's just that much more grab on the connection. So like I say, 609 was the original. 609 doesn't bridge a gap. You have to have really close fitting stuff. Then there's 680. 680 is the same as 620 strength wise, but it's only good to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's easier to get apart if you need that. Generally, you're putting stuff together and you don't want it to come apart. So that's why, 620 is just it's the most hold, the most temperature, the most everything for cat crap that's beating around in the dirt or whatever else. It's great in transmissions, and it's just a good all around item to have in your toolbox. So I mean, that pretty well covers it. Like I say, you can get these from China. They seem to work nearly as well at a fraction of the cost. I'm not afraid to buy it. This is definitely counterfeit, but works just well. So now moving on here, I'll talk about Loctite 518, and this is a pretty good one. It's for flanges, for squeeze together metal surfaces. I love it for putting the cylinders on chainsaws. Where the jug meets the crankcase, you can throw the gasket away, put this on, clean everything up, put it on there, and the compression's that much higher. So long as the piston clears the top. But differential housings where the pumpkin goes into the differential. Anytime you've just got a big flat flange bolted together, you want to seal. That's fantastic stuff. It'll bridge like a 20 thousandths, half a millimeter gap. And it sets up. It takes I think it's about 8 hours before you really want to put anything on it. But once it sets up, it doesn't get like candy hard. It's got a little kind of taffy stick to it. Harder than like a lot of guys like Honda Bond or Yama Bond, for like head gaskets and stuff like that. And I don't know, I've never used them too much, so I don't comment on them, but they kind of set up like a taffy. They got a little give to them. This is a little bit harder than that. This has a really good resistance to gasoline, which is its best thing. I mean, as far as stuff, every gasoline eats everything, and we got ethanol gas, and it just bores holes in everything. And this stuff is on the better side of the spectrum of items that hold up to that. So like I say, I think it'll hold to about 400 degrees Fahrenheit. That's right at the ragged edge. It may work on a head gasket on something you're trying to limp along. I wouldn't hesitate to put it on a head gasket of something I was having questionable issues with. If I couldn't get, Permatex makes a spray copper, form a gasket copper, spray a gasket copper, and it's good to 500 Fahrenheit. It's meant for head gaskets. I mean, if you got an aluminum head or something, it's got some stuff that didn't clean up on it. It works. I know it works. Moving on, other Threadlockers. I only really keep blue around. Blue is the easiest to get apart. If I was going to use red, I'll just go ahead and use 620 because that means I really didn't care about it ever coming apart again. Blue will hold stuff. Blue's fine. 545 is one of my favorites. It's a sealant. It's not so much a thread locker. It's for air fittings, pneumatics, hydraulics, other gas fittings. It's fantastic. I mean, pipe threads are such a pain in the ass to get sealed, and 2 drops of 545 on there. If that'll zoom in, this is just it sets up. Heck, you can put it on and finger tight a fitting and wait overnight, and it'll hold 200 pounds of air. It's awesome. Hydraulics, you got to get them pretty clean, but like if you've got a JIC fitting that's got a screwed up cone and seat, won't seal, butter that sucker up with 545, screw it together. It'll hold. It's good stuff. I don't have a can of my favorite, which is Permatex in the little dauber jar, like this with the brush. And for sheet gaskets, that's my favorite thing. You paint that stuff on, and then you can stick the gasket on there, and it stays put. For where you've got a vertical surface that you're trying to get a gasket to hold against. That's such a pain trying to get the bolts to line up on like a rear end or whatever, transmission cases. Just the aviation, Permatex aviation form a gasket tack. This is an antique aerosol can, but it works. I'm kicking around. I use it once in a while. I don't love it because it gets all over. You know, it's got a pretty big spray pattern. Um, but you know, it makes getting the gasket off a pain. But who cares? You know, they don't leak. You know, sheet gaskets won't leak if you paint them on with gasket tack. Then there's old, you know, permatex RTV. Everybody uses it. Nobody uses it right. Um, you know, if you read the install procedure, you're supposed to, you know, put a bead around the flange and gently push everything together and then wait some amount of time. I don't even know, 2 hours to where it sets up and then start even tightening stuff. Well, nobody does that. They just butter it on and run the screws down, and then heck, it all squirts out the sides and ends up in the oil pump suction screen, you know. So I don't love that stuff. Um, like I say, if I can use 518 instead of that, I do. Silicone has a chemical problem as far as I'm concerned. Uh, it leaves a residual behind on aluminum that has to be scrubbed off with sandpaper with emery cloth, uh, or it never really bonds again. It you can't. It's so hard to get the surface clean to where now you've got an ice skating rink if it's had permatex on it before, had silicone on it before. Um, so the better solution for that is to use a polyurethane. Um, 3M 5200 is my go-to for that marine sealant adhesive. I don't have any. It doesn't keep once you open the tube. Um, you know, you got maybe a week if you're lucky. Uh, but you know, it sets up a lot harder, and it's like it's sticky. It's polyurethane. It's good stuff. Um, and you can scrape it off with a razor blade and put polyurethane right back on it, and it'll have the same bond strength as one shot. Whereas silicone on silicone is just funky. It's never good. It's never good. Uh, and then there's the old one. What we were talking about, gasket tack. I think Caterpillar called it gasket mount or something. They had a jar, and it was just old school liquid rubber contact cement. And all the old school mechanics love that stuff, and they butter oil pan gaskets with it, and it's supposed to be contact cement. Well, nobody used it like that. They just painted on like sealant, and it'd kind of do its thing. And I just always thought it was a mess. You were always picking that shit off your fingers, and uh, so I don't use that. I don't use contact cement. Um, it's just, I don't know. It doesn't work that well, and it can go the way of the dodo. Um, so that's just a little bit on sealants and Threadlockers, adhesives. Uh, just you don't need a giant cabinet full of this stuff. If you've got these 3 or 4 items, you know that does 90% of what you encounter, um, and saves you from having stuff come apart when you don't want it to, and maybe makes your life a little tougher down the road, but probably not. It's a lot easier to have a seal stay put and wear out than to have it pop out before it was trash. Um, so again, just a quick one on that, and appreciate it. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll talk to you later. Bye bye.